Hi, meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Friday, August 30th. A serious weather situation continues to unfold for Florida. Hurricane Dorian has increased in intensity to a Category 3, just on the doorstep of a Category 3, a major hurricane as of Friday morning. It looks like over the next 12 to 24 hours, it certainly should become a major hurricane on its way towards Florida. It will tend to slow down as it approaches Florida early next week. It looks like the likely timetable for arrival will be later Monday into the day on Tuesday. Of course, a slowdown means a prolonged event is possible for much of Florida. That would of course increase the possibility of some serious flooding, as well as some additional wind damage with very strong winds over an extended period of time. Here's the latest positioning of Hurricane Dorian as of 8 a.m. on Friday. Right in this region right here, again, it is a Category 2 storm right now, just on the doorstep of Category 3. Maximum sustained winds right now at 110 miles per hour. Just any kind of a bump up will move it into major hurricane status, Category 3. It looks like it will continue on a northwest track and then turn more of a westerly direction here and head right towards the Florida Peninsula. And again, when it begins to move past the northwest Bahama Islands later in the weekend, it will tend to slow down, and it may not actually arrive on the east coast of Florida until later Monday night time frame, maybe even into the day on Tuesday. The slowdown will be as a result of the weakening of the ridge that is intensifying right now in this region right here. We'll focus in on that over the next few minutes, but there is already high pressure ridging aloft that is part of the reason why it's already undergoing some intensification. As the ridge in the upper part of the atmosphere intensifies, it does a couple of things that favor intensification. One, it tends to reduce overall wind shear, and that is a favorable factor for intensification. It also increases divergence aloft, convergence at the surface. That leads to more and more upward motion, and that is a favorable thing as well for intensification. Again, it has intensified in the last several hours to a Category 2, just on the doorstep of reaching major hurricane status. Well, let's take a couple of satellite views of Hurricane Dorian this morning. This is Friday morning, and a couple of things to note. First of all, you can see the real circulation. It has kind of widened in the overnight hours. You can see some signs of circulation all the way out surrounding the center of Hurricane Dorian. Still no real sign of an eye. That should start to become more and more apparent over the next several hours as it continues to intensify. Kind of a broader storm right now, Category 2, just on the doorstep of a Category 3, and moving still in a northwesterly direction, but that will start to turn more to a westerly direction over the next couple of days as that ridge to the north intensifies. But the ridge to the north, by the early part of next week, let's say late Sunday, Monday time frame, begins to weaken, and that is one of the main reasons why we expect it to slow down as it closes in on the Florida Peninsula. Well, here's a look at infrared satellite imagery of Hurricane Dorian. In the very last couple of frames, you can kind of see a little black dot right in the center area, and that is very likely where the eye is beginning to develop here. More visible right now using infrared satellite imagery than what we had from the visible satellite. Of course, the visible satellite was just as the sun's coming up, so it's still kind of a dark image there. But here's the latest infrared satellite imagery loop continuing to move in a northwesterly direction around 12 miles per hour, and that northwesterly direction should start to turn to a more westerly direction over the next several hours. Well, here's a compilation of numerous models and their forecasts and tracks over the next few days. Again, it is moving more northwest right now, but then we'll kind of take that bend and move to, more in a westerly direction. And talked yesterday about how when it makes this turn, really from a northwesterly direction to a westerly direction, that bend often results in significant intensification. It's not because of the bend itself that causes the intensification. It's because usually the bend is a result of an intensifying high pressure ridge aloft. And again, we talked up front about ridging aloft that is intensifying is a positive for intensification because it lowers wind shear, it increases upward motion with divergence aloft and convergence at the surface. So the bend itself is a good signal for some intensification. Indeed, it is undergoing that turn right now as we speak, has increased from a Category 1 to a 2, and very soon should become a major hurricane. And watch for additional intensification over the next day or two because of that intensifying ridge in the upper part of the atmosphere. Once it passes through the northern Bahama Islands and approaches Florida in about this period right in here, it will begin to slow down. That upper level ridge we're talking about actually begins to weaken later in the weekend, early next week. And a slowdown is never a good thing with a hurricane. We call Hurricane Florence slowed down and created some tremendous flooding situations. Anytime you have a slowing hurricane, it increases the chance for a prolonged rain event, a prolonged wind event. Not a good thing, but it will tend to slow down as it approaches. And in addition, with the weakening ridge, it will allow it to start to make a turn to the northwest and then ultimately to the north, and it very likely could end up going up the eastern seaboard, at least to the Carolinas, maybe even all the way up the coast later next week. We could be dealing with this particular storm, Hurricane Dorian, a week from now, perhaps in the mid-Atlantic region or the northeastern part of the U.S. again, as a result of the slowing down phase here later in the weekend and during the early part of next week. Well, let's go through some of the model forecasts right now. And again, we've been focusing on that high-level, high-pressure ridge aloft that has already begun to influence Hurricane Dorian. It is intensifying in the area. It's shown on this particular map of the ensemble run of the GFS from last night at 6Z here in orange, right in this region right here. This is the high-pressure ridging at the upper part of the atmosphere. We're looking at 500 millibar height anomaly maps right here, and here is the reflection of Hurricane Dorian in the mid and higher levels of the atmosphere. So again, with high pressure to the north, general westerly flow of air here will form and change that direction from a northwest to a westerly direction over the next several hours as it continues towards the Florida Peninsula. Now, let's push forward here in time and watch what happens to this ridge. Again, intensifying right now, favorable for intensification. Let's move forward here, and there's that ridge. It starts to weaken later in the weekend. Here we are now by Saturday afternoon. At this time, expect Dorian to be a major hurricane, and let's move forward here. Notice the oranges here, and watch what happens here as we get in the latter stages of the weekend. This is starting to close in, close in on the east coast of Florida at this time, Sunday afternoon, over the northern Bahama Islands, and then that ridge starts to weaken to the north. Right at the time it's arriving near the east coast of Florida, this is now Monday morning, kind of a weakening ridge here. That will tend to allow this system to slow down, and also not only slow down but also tend to allow it to start to turn to the northwest and ultimately the north. And again, it could very well turn up the eastern seaboard later next week. We're looking at arrival time now on the east coast of Florida in the later Monday night, Tuesday time frame, and a prolonged event of heavy rain and strong winds, of course, will make it a more damaging scenario for much of the east coast of Florida. Let's move forward here, and it's sitting right on top of Florida here as of Monday evening, and not much of a ridge now over the western Atlantic. There is one intensifying over the western U.S., but at this time, this very well could make that turn and go right up the eastern seaboard. This is, again, one computer model forecast, the ensemble run of the GFS, and here's the reflection of it all the way into the early part of next Thursday. So again, we could be dealing with this system along the East Coast for another week to go. A week from now, next Thursday or Friday, it very well could be impacting parts of the eastern seaboard. The European model has it going to the Carolinas and kind of off the coast, and then slamming into New England a week or so from now. Well, let's take a look at last night's 6E GFS model run, and then we'll end up by looking at NOAA's top hurricane forecast model called the HWRF. This is GFS from 6E, and here is Hurricane Dorian reflected on this particular model forecast map for this morning, Friday morning. And let's just push forward here, and it turns basically from northwest to west, approaching the northern Bahama Islands by Sunday morning. And here's where it really intensifies into Category 3, perhaps Category 4, before making an approach to the east coast of Florida. Here we are now, Monday morning, and it is slowing down. It is absolutely slowing down here with that weakening of the ridge to the north, and the GFS model then pushes it across east central Florida, the southern half of Florida, by Monday night. This is Monday night, the night of Labor Day, and then it continues to start to make a turn to the northwest, and then ultimately the north. The GFS model has it riding up, and here we are all the way into next Thursday morning, still dealing with this system in Florida, Georgia, somewhere in that area. Of course, this is a week away, so this is just giving an idea of what could happen, but it then pushes it up, and in this particular run off the Carolina coastline. Again, this is now Friday night, a week or so from now. European model has a similar idea with the storm going up through the Carolina coastline, then maybe a little bit off the coast, and then moving into New England a week or so from now. So again, we could be dealing with Hurricane Dorian for at least a week or so from this particular point in time. Well, let's just wrap up with NOAA's hurricane forecast model called the HWRF. This is a forecast map for Monday night. This is the night of Labor Day, and here it is, Lake Okeechobee right here, Florida's east coast right here, and this is the location, a major hurricane, Category 4 hurricane, I believe at this particular time, 933 millibars. Don't focus so much on the actual millibars here, just look at it as no doubt a major hurricane at this time, closing in on the east coast of Florida. Let's just push forward here. Again, this is the forecast from the NOAA's hurricane model called the HWRF. This is now Tuesday morning, right in this region right here along the east coast of Florida. And again, at this particular time, it will be a slow mover and a major hurricane. And at this particular time, it starts to make that turn to the northwest and then ultimately the north. And we still could be dealing with this along the east coast a week from now. So certainly continue with preparations for a potential major hurricane hit if in the state of Florida. Stay on guard in Georgia and the Carolinas, and really all the way up the eastern seaboard, as this could have an impact all the way up the eastern seaboard later next week. But continue with preparations in the state of Florida. That's it for now. I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.